He sold out stadiums. He moonwalked in front of millions. He was the most photographed face on the planet. Every move he made in public was studied, replayed, and picked apart. Reporters waited outside gates for hours just to catch one blurry photo. Every headline turned him into something bigger than a person, a legend, a mystery, a target. But put him next to a kid, and all of that disappeared. No crown, no stage, no spotlight, just a grown man who never really stopped being a child himself. The world spent decades trying to figure out who Michael Jackson really was, but maybe they were looking in the wrong places. Not the concerts, not the interviews, not the headlines. Maybe the real him only showed up in the quiet, unfiltered moments, the ones nobody was supposed to see. These are the moments the world barely got to see. The side of Michael Jackson that only came out around kids. Neverland wasn't just a home, it was built for exactly one purpose, so kids never had to stop playing. A Ferris wheel in the backyard. A zoo full of animals he knew by name. A movie theater stocked with candy nobody ever had to pay for. Guests said the same thing, over and over. The second children showed up, Michael was the first one at the gate to greet them. Not the staff, not security. Him. He'd get down on one knee before he even said hello because he didn't want to tower over anyone. That single habit told you everything about how he saw the world. To him, being tall wasn't a position of power. It was a wall. And he spent his whole life trying to climb over it just to meet a kid at eye level. Then there was the go-kart track. Michael built one on the property, and the rule was simple. No adults allowed to drive slow. If you were racing him, you were racing him for real. He'd line up next to the youngest kid on the property, rev the engine like it was the Indy 500, and take off laughing before anyone even said, go. Kids who grew up around him have talked about how competitive he actually was. Not fake competitive. Not letting the kid win competitive. He wanted to win. And when he lost, he'd throw his hands up, spin around, and demand a rematch on the spot. That was the pattern with him. Whatever the game was, kickball, water gun fights, a race to the treehouse, he played like his reputation depended on it. Which, in his own world, it kind of did. The amusement park rides at Neverland ran 24 hours if he wanted them to. There are stories of him waking a group of kids up at 2 a.m. because he couldn't sleep, and the carousel was just sitting there doing nothing. Half asleep, in pajamas, a group of children would pile onto the teacups or the Ferris wheel at 2 a.m. while Michael operated the controls himself, laughing the entire time, like he'd just gotten away with something. Nobody made him do that. There was no camera crew, no reason to perform. That's what made it different from everything else people knew about him. On stage, every move was rehearsed. Around kids, in the middle of the night, on a ride nobody asked for. That was just who he actually was when nobody was supposed to be watching. He also had a weakness for pranks, and kids figured that out fast. Water balloons left above door frames, whipped cream hidden inside a shoe, a rubber snake tucked under a pillow that made half the room scream. But the twist was, he was an easy target right back. Kids would gang up on him specifically because they knew he'd overreact on purpose, throwing his arms up and yelling like he'd just survived an explosion, just to make everyone laugh harder. It became a running joke among the people who spent time around him. You never knew if the prank started with the kids, or if Michael had planned it all along and just let them think it was their idea. Ice cream was another thing he took far too seriously. There was an ice cream parlor on the property, fully stocked, and he treated it like his personal kingdom. Kids remember him standing behind the counter himself, piling on toppings until the cup couldn't hold anymore, then acting shocked when it collapsed everywhere. He'd hand out the messiest sundae in the building to the smallest kid in line and call it the reward for being brave enough to try it. It wasn't really about the ice cream. It was about being the guy who got to make a kid's day a little sillier than it needed to be. Storytime looked different with him, too. He didn't read books straight through. He'd stop halfway, change the ending on purpose, and watch the kids' faces when the villain suddenly became the hero, or the dragon turned out to just want a hug. If someone complained, "That's not how it goes," he'd shrug and say the book was wrong, not him. It was a small thing, but it said something bigger. He liked bending reality just enough to make it more fun. On stage, that instinct built entire world tours. In a living room, with 3 kids on a beanbag, it just built a better bedtime story. Animals were part of almost every memory kids had of him. He'd walk a chimpanzee on a leash like it was the most normal thing in the world, and somehow, around him, it was. He introduced every animal on the property by name, like they were members of the family. Because to him, they were. Kids who visited talk about him letting them feed the giraffes, hold snakes they were terrified of 30 seconds earlier, and ride elephants like it was just another Tuesday. He wasn't performing eccentric billionaire for the cameras in those moments. There were no cameras. He was just a guy who thought a backyard should have more animals in it than most people's zoos. Dance lessons happened too, though they rarely looked like lessons. He'd crank the music up, grab whichever kid was closest, and start moving. Not choreography, just pure chaos. until the whole room was doing some version of the moonwalk badly and laughing about it. Nobody was being trained to be a performer. He wasn't teaching technique. He was just trying to get a room full of shy kids to stop caring what they looked like for 5 minutes. Former guests have said that was the real gift he had. Not the dancing itself, but the ability to make anyone, kid or adult, forget they were being watched. Then there was the campfire. On cooler nights, he'd sit outside with a group of kids, marshmallows on sticks, and tell stories about growing up. About being the youngest one in a house full of older brothers, about getting teased, about feeling like he never quite fit anywhere until he found a stage. Kids who were there remember him getting quiet during those stories. Not sad exactly, just honest, in a way he rarely got to be anywhere else. Because around adults, everyone wanted something from him. A signature, a photo, a piece of the legend. Around kids, nobody wanted anything except for him to keep playing. By the end of most nights, he'd be the last one still awake. Not because he was working, but because he didn't want the day to end. He'd walk the last group of kids back to wherever they were staying, say goodnight like he meant it, and then go find something else to fix, build, or plan for the next day's games. People who spent real time around him say that's the piece the world got wrong the most. The tabloids painted him as strange for surrounding himself with children, but the people who were actually there tell a simpler story. He wasn't hiding from being an adult. He just never wanted to stop being a kid. And for a few hours at a time around the people who reminded him what that felt like, he didn't have to. Board games at Neverland had their own set of unofficial rules, and every single one of them existed because of him. Monopoly could last 6 hours because he refused to sell a property no matter how bad the deal was. Cards games turned into full negotiations, complete with fake trades and last-second betrayals that had kids laughing so hard they forgot who was actually winning. He treated a simple game night like a full production. Snacks were arranged like a buffet. Music played in the background, low enough to talk over. And if a kid started losing too badly, he'd quietly start making mistakes on purpose, sliding a card across the table like it was an accident. Nobody ever called him out on it. Everyone just let him think he was being sneaky. That was part of his charm around children. He wasn't trying to teach them how to lose gracefully or win with class. He just wanted the night to end with everyone laughing, even if that meant bending a rule or two along the way. Then there was the treehouse. It sat high in one of the oldest trees on the property, and Michael treated it less like a plaything and more like a second home. He'd climb up there with a group of kids, sometimes with nothing more than flashlights and snacks, and stay for hours telling made-up stories about the land around them. Pirates who supposedly buried something nearby. A secret path that led nowhere in particular. A bird he swore could understand English if you talked to it slowly enough. None of it was true. All of it was the point. Kids who spent time up there remember him being completely serious while telling the most ridiculous stories, never once breaking character, even when someone called him out for making it up as he went. He'd just grin and say, "You don't know that for sure." That line became something of a running joke among the kids who grew up around him, his answer to almost anything that got questioned. It let the fantasy stay alive a little longer, and that was exactly what he wanted. Bicycles were another obsession. He kept a small fleet of them lined up near the main house, sized for every age, and he'd personally pick which one suited a kid best before racing them down the long driveway. He wasn't shy about trash talk either. He'd pedal alongside the smallest kid on the property, staying just close enough to be annoying, warning them they didn't stand a chance, then losing on purpose at the very last second and acting completely stunned about it. "Oh, how did that happen?" he'd say, hands on his knees, out of breath from laughing more than pedaling. It became something kids looked forward to every visit, not because they thought they could actually beat him, but because losing to Michael Jackson in a bike race felt more like winning than winning did. Which moment do you think says the most about who he really was? Let us know in the comments. Because behind every headline, every controversy, and every stage light, there was just a man who wanted one simple thing: to keep playing a little longer. And if this gave you a different side of Michael Jackson than the one you're used to seeing, make sure to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.